All right. Well, welcome to Facebook Live. I am hosting today Jessica Aubin from the Aubin Aphasia Speech and Language Center. And we have our host, who's sponsored by Holly Ridge. They reached out to Sharon Fite, who's a registered dietitian and has specialized in working with children for a long time now. We are so grateful to be here today and be able to learn a little bit more about healthy eating for kids, what that looks like. So welcome everybody. And Sharon, can you give us a little more background about your experience working with kids?
Sure. So I've been a registered dietitian, nutritionist and I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, but more than 30 years, you can probably tell by. And I have really focused on working with children with special healthcare needs. But to work with children with special healthcare needs, I need to know about nutrition for all children. And so that's really important. And I spent part of my career, a great deal of my career at the University of Washington, retiring from the Center on Human Development and Disability at the end of 2018. But I've been consulting at Holly Ridge for over 30 years and still continue to do that with the families and the children that are there. So that's how I found my way to this presentation today.
That is so fun. So you've had a lot of experience working with children in the birth to 3 age range.
That's right.
Critical years when they're sometimes challenging years to get kids to eat. But you've got a lot of experience with that age group. And then also beyond that age group, I know CHDD at the University of Washington works with all ages.
That's right. That's right. Up to 18 in essence. So yes.
Great. So you've got it all. Wonderful. Well, I know you prepared some great information for us today and some slides. And of course, to our listeners, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to pop it into the chat, and then Sharon can answer those questions as we go along if you have any. Otherwise, I know I really enjoyed visiting with you in our pre-conversations for this. So we have a lot of fabulous information for families. And we're going to get started here with our first slide.
Yes, that'd be great. So I wanted to start here and just talk about my approach as a pediatric dietitian. And of course, if you would come to see me or I talk to families and classes, I am interested in what your child eats. But I put this little puzzle slide, and I didn't think of the puzzle idea, but I put my ideas in the printing up here to just tell you that eating is so much part of the whole world of the child. And I like to look at the whole child. I think about family and friends because eating is a social thing. Good sleep helps children eat better. I like children. I think about active play to use that food that's fuel for your body. I think about thinking play and maybe using children, helping them to learn about food preparation and think about food, just in terms of the interaction with families, about how they feel about food so they'll be healthy and happy. And of course, you can read about food and talk about food at the same time. And I notice we need to have a T on development. I missed that there, but all of that goes in with your child's growth and development. And I just wanted to say quickly about growth. Usually by 2 years of age, children have established a pattern of growth in their length or height and in their weight. And hopefully that pattern will, if they've established that, that will continue as they go up to puberty and beyond. So I just wanted to give my philosophy. So we'll go to our next slide.
Well, before we go on, I
Yeah.
just want to make a comment. I love the way that on your puzzle board, you have playlisted in several different places. And I think that is so powerful for kids because that's how they learn and they grow. And then also it makes food fun, right?
Right, right, right.
That is just so what a great way to approach it. Because I think, I think parents traditionally say to their kids, like, don't play with your food.
Yeah,
Right?
play is part of food. We're going to talk about that a little bit later too. So yeah.
Yeah. So I just love seeing that it's on there, not just once, but in lots of different ways because it's how you learn. And it's also, yes, play is learning, Deidre. It is. It's not just how you learn, it's also like how you develop a positive relationship with something.
Right.
So cool. Anyway, next slide.
All right. So just a little bit more about registered dietitians. So recently, our professional organization said that we could also use this 3 words, registered dietitian nutritionist, because people never quite knew what to call us. But I just want to say that we do have a background in food and nutrition, and we take the science that we've learned and help try to work with the community and help lots of people understand what's going on. So you can read this slide. We work in lots and lots of different areas along the way. But the important part is with our education, we do take an exam and we get our RD or RDN. And with that, every 5 years, like many other professions that are related to the to medicine, is we have to have 75 continuing education units, just like many of, if you've ever been a speech therapist or an occupational therapist or seen a doctor or whatever, all of us have continuing education. So I just wanted to mention that as we go on, and that's what my background is. So we can go to the next slide.
So after 30
Yes.
years of being in practice and you have to do what, 25 hours a year? That's a
Well,
lot of
not quite 75
information.
every 5 years, but yeah, right.
That's still a lot of information.
But things
Wow.
are constantly changing, and that's part of, even for anything that we find out new information. So it's important for us to stay up to date and relevant with what's going on, just like anybody else that's working with families.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, great. So,
So,
oh
yeah,
yeah.
go
I
ahead,
was
Jessica.
So you have this information on division of responsibility in feeding. And so this is kind of a new concept to me because it seems like, mom or dad make food, they put it in front of baby, baby eats food. And it's not like that. How
So,
does this actually work?
yeah, I've done a lot of talks to parents of 2-year-olds over the year, and I would ask them, so what is the parent's responsibility, the caregiver's responsibility? And they'd go through, buying the food, preparing it, hopefully knowing and what a good schedule is for your child, not being rigid, but understanding about how often they might need to eat, to be a model, to sit with them and eat at the same time. And all those kinds of things. And then I'll ask the parents, what is the child's job in terms of feeding? And I love it when a parent says, well, to eat, because that's not what Ellen Satter, and you have this website and information you can go to. And I would encourage families to go read a little bit more. Ellen covers feeding from birth up through teens, and it's a concept that all nutritionists use these days. So Ellen says the child's job is to decide whether or not they're going to eat and how much they're going to eat of what is served to them. So you as parents have the responsibility to get that food to the table or wherever, eating it. Hopefully you're having family meals. And then the child is to decide if they're going to eat anything of what is served. But that doesn't mean if they're not going to eat what you're going to serve, you go and become a short order cook. So hopefully you've considered what your child would like. And we also are going to talk a little bit later, not right at this minute, about how to really offer new foods and how to become successful with offering new foods. So it's really important that parents understand their job, but they don't force children to eat. They let the child make that decision about if they're going to eat and how much they're going to eat of what is served. And remember, all of, if you had babies, you trusted them to let you know when they were hungry. Trust your older children and your teens to let you know when they're hungry too. So that's what that concept is.
Boy, that is a really good concept to reinforce, because I clearly was like, no, children's job is to eat.
Yeah.
But it makes a lot of sense that their real job is to try things and decide if they're hungry or not hungry and ready and able. Yeah.
Right. And we are going to talk about timing. Maybe we should go to the next slide because we can talk a little bit more about presentation of food. So I know parents want to get their kids to eat more and different foods.
Oh, yes,
And
they do. They do. That
right,
is the number one thing. They're like, whoa, I don't know about Junior.
right. And so I think we need to realize that children need lots of exposures to foods. And this research was really done by a person back in the early 80s looking at um, the more the child is exposed to food or the frequency that they're exposed to food, it leads to that food becoming more preferred by them. So we kind of wander around like 10 to 15 times. Actually, in the study, they also did 20 times.
So,
But if
wait,
a
I have
child
a quick
doesn't,
question,
yeah,
Sharon.
go ahead.
Quick question. So, does that mean, like, if you always put chicken nuggets in front of your kids, that they're going to develop a preference for chicken nuggets above something else?
Well, it would be nice to serve a variety. Nutritionists, dietitians believe in variety.
Mhm.
Chicken nuggets could be part of a food they prefer, but I'd like to see just plain chicken or
Mhm.
chicken offered maybe in a different way. Um, versus just the same foods day after day. Remember, if you've heard it all, variety is really important in terms of what we're eating, both in the types of foods we eat, and also like in the color of foods. We think about fruits and
Mhm.
vegetables and the color of the foods we eat. We
Mhm.
think about grains being different in variety. It's not only bread or cereals or rice or what I want to say, farro or just went right out of mind, but different things. So it's possible. It's really nice to have some variety. Now, some families culturally, there are foods that are served every day because that's a cultural thing. But then also, they seem to use other foods in different food groups that add a lot of variety to life. So we encourage variety.
So, mix it up.
Right. So, what I was going to go on to say is in terms of eating more and different foods, one, the adults need to be eating them. If children see other children eat foods, this is a really positive thing, also. But going back, so Jessica, you mentioned playing. So,
Oh,
when we
yeah.
introduce foods, most of the time when you're introducing new foods, children are younger, not always, but we're introducing foods. And so, what exposure means is the first time, a couple times they might see the same food, they might just look at it. They might just touch it. Maybe they'll pick it up and smell it and put it back down. Maybe they'll pick it up and lick it and go, I'm not today for me. Maybe they'll pick it up and take a bite and put it down. Maybe eventually they'll pick it up, take a bite, and actually say, oh, this is pretty good. Some children like to dive right into new things, but there are other children, think about temperament a little bit
Oh,
with
yeah.
your child, and they take more time to get to know foods. But bottom line is, if you don't expose the children to a variety of foods, they never have the chance to explore it and either accept it or reject it. And we all have things that we dislike ultimately. But if you don't have it there, don't give them the experiences, then they never get to interact with it. So don't give up after giving it 2 or 3 times and think they don't like that. Try to go a longer road down that way along
So,
the way.
how many times? I mean, I know as a speech language pathologist, working with children who have, um, you know, feeding and swallowing issues, that sometimes you have to put the exact same thing presented the exact same way in front of a child up to 32 times, or a lot before they'll even approach it in a
Right.
different way sometimes. But how many, I mean, for parents, when
Yeah.
they
What's
things are
reasonable?
going well, yeah,
Yeah.
what's a
I mean,
reasonable amount of time to offer something?
you remember also the child needs to fit into your family. So I wouldn't offer broccoli every night, but I think once a week might be good to exposure. And I'm just using that, just because it came to me. But that's important. And says, is it worthwhile to have your little ones explore their food, even if they aren't exactly eating it yet? Yes, 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 yes. Exploration is how they learn about food, and that's okay. And, don't give them a lot, just give them a little bit. But back to how many times. So the research, really, we usually say 10 to
Oh,
15 times.
we got another question here.
Well, I don't even have to answer it. It's perfect. The answer is there. When mentioning about having other children or making experiences, making opportunities to see other children. Hopefully, in this time, we will have opportunities to see other children safely and be able to see them eat. And if your child's going to daycare now, even with mask on, most of the time they have to
Oh,
take them off for eating. So that's
can
the
you get
important
that
thing to
that
do.
back? I'm going to read that um, from Alyssa. We kept trying to give our 1-year-old banana, and she would toss it. And then one day, big sister was having it, and now she loves banana. I think that is just classic about how
Yeah,
kids learn. Like they were like, "Ooh, a bowl of chili, gross. That is
right.
just disgusting." And then one day they see their bestie snarfing down chili, and they're like, "Oh yeah, but that kind of chili."
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say, usually we say 10 to 15 times, give or take. Now, in part of my professional practice, I have worked with children that have more what we call very, very selective eating patterns. And for those children, today I'm really trying to talk about what we sort of
most
generally expect
most of
when
the
we
time.
feed and eat children. But for some children that have a very selective eating pattern, so I'll just say maybe perhaps a child with a diagnosis of autism, it does take many, many times, but we consider that child, where they're coming from, working with the family, helping with behavior. Other children, and again, talking generally about what we expect in feeding children. Um, I just want to acknowledge that every child is an individual, and so each child should be approached as an individual. And if you have concerns, we're going to talk a little bit at the end about what to do if you have concerns about feeding your child. But every child is individual. We all have our quirks. Your children will have their little quirks about feeding too. But we at least want to know that we're giving them a variety of food, giving them many opportunities to interact with things at an appropriate time and
And we should
schedule.
be happy if they're just playing with that food, if they're
Yes,
poking it, if they're hiding it in their baked potato peel or hiding it in their glass of milk, that's still playing with their food and they're getting friendly with it. So we should be
right.
happy, right?
Right. Although if they've been at the table at 40 minutes and they're playing with food, I might suggest they're done. I'm hoping your child's done. I think realistically, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, about it along the way. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I guess reason needs to come into play at some
right,
point.
right.
Um,
Okay. So if we can go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about so one of the questions that came up about snacking. So I'm just going to make a comment on this slide, and I think the lovely person who helped me do these knows I'm going to do this. So um, when I think, say, snacks, I know a lot of people, when they think snacks, they think of crispy items, many of which are portrayed on this
on
slide.
this picture, yeah, it does. I see lots of very crunchy, yummy. Oh, I like the idea of licking and kissing the food as an example for the littles. Is this still a good idea to show children? That's a good
Yeah,
question.
they might even figure it out on their own, but yes, you could do that. I'm not the feeding therapist, so there's usually that's done, but yes, they might figure that out on their own. And decide that might be a way for them to interact with the food, especially if they're a little tentative. So it might be a
Mm.
good thing to try. Um,
I remember when my kids were little too that their dad used to play with the food by making like helicopter
yeah,
noises,
right,
or he would pretend like there was a snowstorm outside and he'd be like, "Help, help, let me in. I'm gonna get cold out here." And
right.
then my kids would eat that
Well,
food. Is that okay?
I think there's a fine balance here. I think if mealtime becomes entertainment versus working on eating, perhaps we need to put the entertainment down a little bit. Licking and kissing, that comment that came before, you could say, "Oh, this is a new food. What should we do?" So we kiss it first so we know what it's like, and then maybe not too much more the rest of the meal, letting them explore on their own. I think sometimes one of the playing, like the helicopter in the snow and opening your mouth, we really encourage parents not to, and that's, I mean, I know that wasn't forcing, but it's almost like forcing the child to eat a
Mm.
little bit. And so we encourage parents not to force your child to eat, not to use food, like one food as a bribe to eat the other. So, you have
Mm.
to eat 5 peas and then you can get your
Oh.
applesauce or whatever that might be, or not to use a food as a reward because you did this. We like food to be presented at meal times and then move on from there. And so one of the things also that we've suggested over the years is often food was used in school as a reward, especially sometimes with behavior programs. And we would prefer not to do that, but to find something else um, that not in that way. And especially sometimes these kinds of foods were used, these snacky kinds of foods, because
Mhm.
they were easy to handle. So we
Oh, yeah,
prefer
they're
not to.
not slimy. They're
Yeah,
easy to
right,
pick up,
right.
they go in your mouth, they are crunchy
Yeah,
and fun. Yeah.
right. So
But
let's back up a little bit and talk about how much snacking is okay. So
oh,
young,
wait, were you gonna
yes,
talk about what is a snack? Like, you were
yes, I'm gonna.
indicating that there were other foods on here that
Yeah, we're going to get there. So let's
okay.
back up a second and say, well, how much snacking is okay? So let's talk about what we have in expectations for eating. So most children, even starting the young up to even teens, probably need to be offered food 4 to 6 times a day. Now, we tend to think of that as 3 meals and then whatever snacks. For very young children, I like to think of that as 4 to 6 little mini meals, because really every bite counts along the way. Even us older folks, every bite really should count. But I understand, sometimes there's some foods that we just like to have because they're fun or they taste good, but maybe they're not part of our everyday diet. The other thing is, most of us, after we've had a meal or a snack that's more than just a cracker, can go about 2 hours without feeling hungry. And you know your children better than I do. Some children are 2 hour people, some children are 2.5 hour or 3 hour. And then they might need something to tide them over a bit till the next meal, because we tend to be here in the United States 3 meals and snacks along the way. So I want you to think about that. Is that 2 hour window of when there's a person called Jill Castle. So this is where I got this from. She's also a dietitian, and she has a blog you can go and find. She says the kitchen is closed for a period of time. And then we
Mhm.
would have a snack, and then we, might have another meal or whatever that might be along the way. But for very young children, so we have that 2 hour window, but certainly offer every 3 to 4 hours. If you have a teenager that's in sports and active, they
Mm.
might need food even a little bit more often than that. So at meal times, what I think of is a great meal is offering a protein source, whether you're vegetarian or not, just a protein source, whatever that might mean to you, a grain source, a
So it
vegetable and
could be
or a
nuts.
fruit. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah. And
Yep.
a source of calcium. I mean, I like to have milk or a calcium rich beverage to drink, but it doesn't always have to be, your calcium doesn't always have to come from a beverage. But that's what I consider a meal. Snack
So
time,
what
yeah.
would be some good sources of calcium that is not a beverage?
Well, and that gets a little, so anything that would be in, if you think about the dairy food group, so this, we're talking about cow's milk or that kind of thing, would be cheese or yogurt and, you know, ice cream. I know it has added sugar, but it does.
Yes.
It is made from milk. Pudding, added sugar, but made from milk. You can actually have a fairly decent source of calcium from a half a cup of pudding, which would be a typical serving size. You know, like broccoli has
Ah,
calcium, but for a little child to get enough calcium from broccoli, I mean, they'd be eating cups and they're not going to be able.
they're not. I
Right,
can't get adults to eat cups of
right.
broccoli.
Some other sources, frankly, right now, some people like ready to eat cereals. Some people are like, well, whatever, but sometimes they have added calcium to them um, along the way. And then other foods like, breads often have calcium added to them, but it's a
Oh,
smaller amount. So we really think of like the dairy foods, or many people now might use a nut milk
yeah.
or soy milk, or there's also rice milk and coconut milk. I'm not as fond of those for young children because they don't have as much protein in them that I might like to see. Young children, it's harder for them to eat. Now, an older individual, you might do fine with that. So,
Hmm.
so
Okay, so
okay,
you
so
should
back to
also
snacks. Yeah, back to
looking at
snacks.
what's in your beverages. And yeah, let's get back to snacks.
So, and then not just so snacks. I like to see a vegetable or a fruit. So every time you eat something, that 4 to 6 times for children and teens, I want to see a vegetable or fruit there, because then you have a chance of reaching your needs for vegetable or fruit in a day. Now, again, you might offer it to your child. They might decide this is the day I'm not going to eat that, but that's okay. You've put it there in front of them and they have it. So a vegetable and or a fruit at snack time. I'd like to see a bit of a protein source. So you might offer, a couple little pieces of mandarin orange and a cracker with a nut butter on it, or a cracker with a cheese on it, or a cracker with hummus, or, whatever that might be along the way. Beverage, they can have water to drink. And one of the things that's really important, that way back when I talked about Ellen Satter at the beginning, and
Mhm.
Jill Castle, I mentioned the blog about the kitchen is closed, is we like children to have a beverage like milk or water at mealtimes or snacks, and that they learn to drink water in between meals and snacks for thirst. So, not juice in between meals, not milk, particularly in between meals, but water. And I don't have a problem with juice. Per se for children, but there are amounts that are guided for young children, no more than 4 ounces a day. And so this would be children like 4 and under, like that 5 to 8 group, maybe 6 ounces, but no more than 8 ounces a day, even for those teens. And that means a straight juice, whether it's vegetable based or fruit based, but especially we work on the fruit based ones.
So,
Um,
what is the rationale for limiting the juices?
It's right. So you can really fill up on juice quite a bit. And then there's not room for children to be hungry for other things along the
Mhm.
way. And so again, we wouldn't eat oatmeal all day, even though it's a lovely food, because where do we get the fruits and vegetables? And so it's the same thing for juice. Also, if you drink juice excessively, some kids get diarrhea from that.
Mm.
And also, I think about dental health a little bit. And if you're
Mhm.
constantly drinking juice during the day in between meals and snacks, you're exposing your teeth. There is naturally occurring juice and natural occurring sugar in 100% fruit juice. And every time you kind of expose your teeth to this fermentable carbohydrate. The little bacteria in your mouth love it. They want to wake up and go, oh, yay. And they might produce some acid, which might affect dental care.
Mm,
So anyway, so that's where we are. So
got
snacking,
it.
I think probably 2 to 3 snacks a day is reasonable, unless you have a child that is super active for some reason, like sports. And then, but again, that's an individual child, and that's how we approach each child individually.
Got it.
So um, so we can go to the next slide unless Jessica has some questions, because one of my favorite things to talk about, which I think might be coming, is to involve children in mealtime preparation from an early age. And I
Oh,
believe we have some resources that we're sharing, starting even at 2 years old, some things that are age appropriate
you do.
for children to do in the kitchen, and then moving on up from there. I just want to remind parents, make sure you wash your hands. That's something you teach right at the beginning whenever you're going to do food preparation. Obviously, you should be around when children are especially young until they really get old enough to be independent in the kitchen. I When children in older elementary school, you might consider scouts or 4-H clubs or cooking classes for them to participate in, on up into their teenage year.
Yeah, there
Um,
are some great cooking classes locally on Bainbridge Island. There are
yes.
organizations in Seattle that offer cooking classes for children. I know the Barn on Bainbridge Island has cooking classes for kids as well. The local bread shop, Pandamore Bakery, offers cooking classes for kids. So you really have to dig into it a little bit to find those resources sometimes, but they are such great opportunities for kids to get their hands dirty and enjoy food.
Right. And maybe try some new foods with other kids around that are trying at the same time. Um,
Might
so,
maybe what you baked didn't turn out. It's
right,
okay. You live, you learn.
right. One of the other things I wanted to remind families is you can garden with your children, even if
Oh,
you just plant a pot of beans or a pot of like a pepper, but they can watch food grow. And then one of the last things, especially as children get a little bit older, is I'd like to encourage families to let your children um, start one by picking the menu for a night, and then maybe picking the menu and preparing the foods. But I want you to put some structure around that. So what I want to say is you need to say, okay, you guys can pick what we're going to have for dinner for Friday night, but here's the guidelines. You need to pick a protein, you need to pick a grain, so you might have to talk about what those are. You need to pick a vegetable or a fruit to serve. So, and the beverage, again, something maybe with calcium in it or whatever, but put a little structure around it, but then let them pick what it is. So you might have some interesting combinations, but this starts to help them understand about, how do I pick a meal? How do I put a meal together? You can work with them to cook it together. And I think you can do that even when they're in school age. And if you have younger children, then they can have a role in it and then go on from there. And you might initially you might have to cook it. Maybe they're helping, but then as they get older, they might have the skills to be able to do that, but still picking the foods within the structure.
So you could potentially get pictures of several choices for
Right.
their mealtime, and you can say, okay, pick one of these and one of these and one of these, and that's what we're going to eat.
And that might be a great way to start. Say you could have this or this or this, or we could have this or this or this, and offering some choices to help them start. And then they pretty soon, especially older children, are going to be able to think of things on their own. so, um, so someone is saying that they're working now on meal planning with their 15-year-old. You
That's
can even
awesome.
start earlier than that. So,
Probably at 2 with pictures, right? With teenagers, there are a lot of apps out there, like Meal Lime is one where you can actually, on that app, you can put in any diet restrictions or allergies or just food preferences, and it'll pull up a whole bunch of pretty easy to make recipes. And I would imagine that a 15-year-old would be able to pull up a recipe on Mealime or even just on the internet and then cook it. I like the Mealtime app a lot because it has a list of all of the tools that you need to cook the food,
Right.
a list of ingredients, and then also step-by-step instructions. So it's pretty hard to mess up.
Right. And I'm sure more of those things will become available. Um, but also you can do it yourself at home. So there's lots of more options these days. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
you know,
Fun.
take that opportunity.
Mm.
Okay, next slide. Well,
Um,
so this was a question, how much fruit is too much? And I think often, especially of younger children that I've worked with, that their preference
mm,
is fruit because they, it does taste a little sweeter than vegetables. But I think also vegetables for younger children have to be cooked, and sometimes they don't quite have the zing that they're cooked. Especially, I grew up with boiled vegetables. At least now you can roast them. I think
mm.
there's some options that taste better that way. But let's go back to fruit. So one of the resources that we provided is called myplate.gov. Used to be called choosemyplate.gov. This is what our government provides in terms of nutrition and eating. And you can go in and find some guidelines per age. Now, one of the things it's interesting about this site is you can enter your child's um, age and whether their sex, whatever you decide that is, how active they are, these kinds of things. And then they will produce sort of a calorie level, which also talks about serving sizes.
Oh,
So
wow.
as a nutritionist, I want to tell you that this is a guide. I
Mm,
don't do a lot telling families about how many calories to feed their children because
mm.
I want them to respond to their children's hunger and full cues and, eat what is given and go that way. I mean, there's a couple conditions that I do, and there's certain situations, but regularly at meals at home with parents, I'm not going to do that. So I see why they did this because it's serving, but they can tell you about servings for fruits. But recently, let's see, we're 2020, the end of 2020, what happens every 5 years, there's a new dietary guidelines that comes out, and it makes some broad recommendations. And so I'm just going to zip through the age groups and I'm going to tell you about fruits and vegetables because I want you to think of them both along the way because I want both of them are there. So for the first time, we actually got guidelines for 12 to 24-month-old children. We can't, they've been eating all this time, but we never had guidelines before this. So the range of vegetables and fruits, as they say, this age might eat 2/3 of a cup. And I didn't bring a measuring cup in to show you, but 2/3, if it's just a measuring cup, what we're talking about, to 1 cup of vegetables each day and a half a cup to a cup of fruit each day.
That's
And
not
that,
a lot.
pardon, it is not a lot. And that range is because children do have different appetites, and a
Mm,
younger child may eat a little less than an older child. If we move on to the 2 to 8-year-olds, again, we have this range 1 to 2.5 cups of vegetables daily and 1 to 2 cups of fruit daily. So, again, excuse me,
no problem.
that's a pretty wide range, and it will vary remember, your children are individual. If we go on to the 9 to 13-year-olds, so this is upper elementary into junior high,
Mm.
vegetables 1.5 to 3.5 cups daily, fruit 1.5 to 2 cups daily. And finally, those 14 to 18-year-olds, two and
Mm.
a half to 4 cups of vegetables daily. Sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat. Or 1.5 to 2.5 cups of fruit daily. So we certainly want to emphasize vegetables, but fruit, I think it depends. And certainly younger children, a cup as we go up, 2 cups, maybe 2.5 as a teenager. Um, and one of the points that the dietary guidelines made is the amount of vegetables and fruit went up as the child's calorie level, or what I like to call energy level, went up. So again, thinking about those teens that are active in sports, they need to eat more. But we hope in that eating more that it's just not carbohydrates and it's just not protein,
Mhm.
but it's just more variety of foods. They might have to focus on some energy dense foods, but it's a variety, not just, going particularly in one area.
That makes a lot of sense, that it would be balanced and that you would
Right.
want to you would want to spread it out a little. Well, and for active teens, because I know we've talked a lot about littles, but for active teens, um, are there certain times when they might need more protein or more carbohydrates? Like if you have a child who's a competitive swimmer or plays, a sport that's, where they have a competition coming up.
Right. So, typically not more protein unless they're really, I guess, an elite athlete. And I will tell you, this is not my area of practice. Um, Certainly more energy, but again, a variety of foods. And there are recommendations for um, sports, like, versus, like, if you were going to run cross country, is a very different sport than doing swimming, and you do something and you're done, and you do something and you're done, events.
Mhm.
So there are, I'm going to just tell you, there's Nancy Clark is a dietitian that has written a book about sports nutrition and updated it. And I'm
Mm.
going to refer you to something like that, because again, that really, it's something that I'd have to go read up about. And I know there's some ideas, but there's not a wonder food. There's not a wonder drink. There are some guidelines, and we try to stay with, real food, what we're doing, but also know that there's some other options. Like if you're doing a marathon, you got to find things that are easy to eat, that are nutrient dense, and that kind of thing. So I'm going to refer you on to a different.
Okay.
um,
So,
the
little
other,
different question.
yeah.
If your little child is like a fruity and they just want to eat fruit all the time, what's a good way to get them to mix it up a little bit better?
So I would try to think about how you offer vegetables. So one of the things is maybe thinking about the form. So obviously you can offer carrot sticks, but maybe you could grate the carrot. Maybe you could just peel a carrot strip and roll it up, and they might enjoy that. I
Oh, yeah.
encourage people to think about frozen peas. Basically, they can eat them raw. So they're frozen, they've been blanched a little bit, but they're really a crunchy kind of cool snack. And frankly, you can eat other things, just frozen out of that, although peas are probably easier to eat along the way. I would encourage sometimes, maybe, um, to explore some new vegetables or some different ways. Go to the grocery store, go to the farmer's market, and just pick out something new. Come home, wash it together, maybe cook it if it's appropriate, maybe serve it raw if it's appropriate, both ways. Which one do you like better? Should we try a little dip with this or not? And then sometimes you just have to say, well, we're having broccoli tonight. I know you like apples, but we'll have apples for snack tomorrow. And then you better follow through the next day with the apples that you're served. Because remember, you're the one in charge. The parent, the caregiver are in charge, and your child is going to choose to eat and how much of what you offer. Again, being mindful of what they like and making sure that you do include some of those preferred foods, during the day, but not all the time.
That they don't
Set,
prefer to.
yeah, set some limits there. So,
Okay.
okay, next slide. Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah.
hopefully we've talked about a lot now that we can talk about behaviors. So something I didn't send, so I'm going to hold this up really quickly and hope people, whoops, let me see how I can see this. So what I've done is I've drawn a straight line, and then I have these little red lines up above. So what I was going to say is, Jessica, if you and I don't want to gain weight, okay, there we go. We pretty much eat probably the same amount every day. There may be some variation in days, But children tend to wander around, and some days they don't eat that much,
Oh,
and then they'll eat
yeah.
a lot, and then they'll go down, and so I encourage parents, if you think your child's being picky, maybe consider what they ate earlier that day. Maybe they ate a lot earlier. Maybe the day before was a big day for them, and try to look over what they ate over a couple days, not so much meal to meal. Children might eat less if they're tired. And so think about that. Remember that puzzle I talked about, all those things? Sleep was one of those things that's
Yeah.
important to think about. And if, it's been a big day the day before, maybe you went and did a venture, maybe they're kind of tired the next day, maybe they're just not as interested in eating. They'll pick it up again. Um, I,
My mom used to always say that. She was like, when your kids are hungry, they'll eat. If they're not hungry, they won't eat. And I've noticed too with my own kids that sometimes they are just ravenous and they eat me out of house and home. And then, like the next week, they're just like bird picking along, but
yes,
they grow in spurts. They don't grow like a
right,
little bit every day.
right,
They like grow and then they don't grow and then they grow
right.
again.
We think growth in height or length has something to do with light. So a lot of times kids start growing when there's more light, like, I mean, the sun is out today. We have a lovely day here. At least in this area, we have a lovely day. So I want you to consider, if you think your child's picky, consider that whole child. Go back to that little puzzle slide. We talked about all those parts and thinking about, well, is there something going on someplace else I should be thinking about?
Mm.
Um, Consider if you're giving servings that are too big. So I brought my little measuring tablespoon. Oh, I'm going the wrong way here. So this is a measuring tablespoon like you'd use in food preparation. And between about 1 and 5 years of age. So we don't, especially if you serve plates, like I encourage you to let your children learn to serve their plate, but sometimes you're serving their plates, is start the meal with one level measuring tablespoon of each food you serve for year of age. If you have a 3-year-old, that's 3 tablespoons of tofu,
Wow.
3 tablespoons of, well, let's say a Brussels sprout, let's say a green bean. How many green beans fit in 3 level tablespoons? Not many green beans. 3 level tablespoons of rice, maybe a couple orange pieces. Don't overwhelm them. A 4-year-old, 4 tablespoons. And it's
Hmm.
not all they can have. I want to reinforce this is how you start the meal. And then if they're still hungry, they can ask for more. And don't they feel good? And don't you feel good? But some days that may be it. I have been to home visits where families put food on the plate, and I thought I couldn't even eat that much. And so, and parents may not know how much their child eats. So I want you to really think about that. And then, like I
So
said,
one more time, you said it's 1 tablespoon of
food,
each food
food
category
served
per year of age.
between like 1 and 5. And then after that, we tend to think of more adult size servings. Yes, exactly.
That
And
is a good rule.
and
Okay.
again, parents, you're going to know your children. So you're going to know, well, yeah, I have sort of like a eater doesn't eat as much. So maybe I should try this and not overwhelm their plate. But then I also know that I have this other child that they're just ready to eat. So maybe I'll put a little bit more on because I know they're always ready to eat. But realize again that day-to-day appetite change and those kinds of things. And then we did talk a little bit about, Jessica, children get what's called food jags,
Oh,
where
yeah.
they want the
You
same.
tell everybody what is a food jag because I
Yes.
remember when we were talking, I was like, "What is a food jag? What is that?"
Right. So children just get in love with a food, but I think we as adults do too.
Oh
We
yeah,
just we get this food and we just want to eat it all the time for a
all
couple
night.
months and then we kind of fade it away and it goes to something else. But children, especially young children learning to eat, get into food jacks where they just want the same food over and over. So I want you again to acknowledge that they're enjoying that food, but you as a parent can say, we had apples for breakfast. We're not going to have apples for lunch. But after dinner, you and I can share an apple again. And so that it's just not every meal. So Jessica and I, we're going to talk about an author now, who I can't remember the author's name, but there's a book called Bread and Jam for Frances.
Oh
And
yeah.
Frances is this little animal, and she gets in this mood where she only wants bread and jam for every meal. So actually her mother, we wouldn't do this. Her mother does do this for her. And then one day at lunch at school, Frances looked at her little friend's lunch and decides, oh, and they trade lunch. You know how children do, because she wanted something different. So she goes home and her mother has her bread and jam. And Frances goes, I don't want bread and jam. And her mother's like puzzled. And she goes, I wanted something else. So I think you have to weather the food jags, but you also can again send some structure around, or plan some structure around those food jags. Thank you. There we are. And but they are common sometimes, and it's okay. Again, you can embrace it to some degree, but also say, well, the family now is having this, you can have more of this at another meal or snack, and make sure you follow through. I think that's the most important thing along the way. So I hope that's helpful for talking about picky eaters.
So I have another question about picky eaters, because I appreciate that sometimes you need to kind of weather the storm with food jags and really be respectful of your children's wishes to eat this, that, or the other. How can you tell if you have a child that has something more than maybe just a food jag going on?
Right. Well, I think then we have to look at the behavior that's associated with mealtime. So, if how do I want to say this? Let me think here for a minute. If a child just melts down every time you offer a new food and won't offer a food, then perhaps it's time to think about what's going on. Is there something going on at this point in time? That they just or just throw a tantrum at the table or whatever that might be. Most children will, especially if you weather the jag some and go with it, but also have not every meal, that they'll move beyond. But if this child is really insistent, maybe there's something else going on. And if we think about our puzzle again, maybe there's something going on for them that we need to explore. So can we go to the next slide? And then we're going to talk about when a child, maybe you might want to see a dietitian. I just wanted to say, here's this Choose My Plate .gov. Actually, it's myplate.gov, but you can still find it under choosemyplate.gov. Lots of information we talked about. You can go find about number of fruit servings and that kind of thing. But remember, it's a guide. It's not a prescription when you go to find things. And I just wanted to say that this is a really good resource. It goes through life stages. So it starts with the youngest children, goes up through teens, into adulthood, seniors. And it's a good reference for learning a bit more about what's really called a healthy eating guide for families. So if we go to the next slide, and then we'll kind of return to the question that Jessica had. So one of the things we wanted to talk about is sometimes families feel like they do need some help around mealtime, food selection, what's happening during snacks and things for their children. So these are some suggestions that I would have when you might consider going to talk to someone, and especially if it's around nutrition and feeding. You can consider a registered dietitian nutritionist to talk with them. One is there's growth concerns. So most children go to well child appointments, and I mentioned early on, you should kind of establish a pattern on that growth chart, and it should be relatively the same year to year after 2 years of age. If there's a rapid weight gain or weight loss, you need to be going in to seeing your pediatrician or other primary care provider, and that might involve a visit to a dietitian. Eating concerns, which is where Jessica is. If your child just drops foods, eliminates them, has tantrums, you probably need to be seen, and there may be something else going on. So again, I spent a lot of time working with children with autism, and about 80% of those children have what we consider selective eating, and they just narrow their food patterns. But that's related to somewhat the diagnosis, maybe some sensory issues. There's other children without autism also that have eating issues. And if you're feeling trouble, if eating is not going well at home. I think it's good to ask parents how eating is going. Again, I'd be back to that pediatrician or primary care provider. And again, this might involve a dietitian. Um, if there's some medical concerns that are going on, often you will go see a dietitian. Let's say, I mean, I remember seeing a young child who eventually became diagnosed with celiac disease as a very young child. He was losing weight and said, okay, we need to go see the doctor. But then it is a condition where you do want to talk with a dietitian about what kinds of foods to do. And so there's also certain syndromes I've worked with, certain metabolic conditions. And then I think if families are able to, I've worked with families through the WIC program, which is the Women, Infants, and Child Supplemental Food and Nutrition Education Program. And actually, they're doing another name now. Dietitians are there. If you are part of that program, you can, if you have questions, go ask. If you just have questions, at my early intervention center, Holly Ridge, if parents have questions, they can come see me. They can get a referral to see. And it's just questions about these kinds of activities. If you're not hooked up with early intervention or WIC, but want to see a dietitian, there may be somebody in your community. And I think if we go to the next slide, I can give you somewhere you can find a dietitian. I would always, talk to your child's doctor for a referral. I think if you have a child that has a concern, it is good to find a dietitian that has worked with children or has pediatric experience. And there is a little subset of dietitians, and that's in one of them, who are a pediatric dietitian. That's how we describe ourselves. I don't do heart disease and senior citizens. Sorry, don't do that. I mentioned WIC. We have a national professional organization, and you can go to this website and you can put in your zip code, and you might be able to find a dietitian in your area. And then we do have in this area, I think Kitsap County dietitians are part of the South Sound. There's a South Sound Dietetic Association. There's a Greater Seattle Dietetic Association, and you might just be able to plug in there. But ask people, ask where you might be able to find some support.
Great. So, and I know Holly Ridge has, obviously you and people they can refer to, and we also have a list of dietitians locally that like you said, each dietitian has a different specialty area or different favorite type of.
Well, some people are more generalists and they do a variety of things, because I worked with children with special healthcare needs. But yes, dietitians do vary. So you might want to ask, have you worked with families and children before, or teens, or that kind of thing before? Yeah, definitely.
So. That is good to know. Yeah. Wonderful. Sharon, I love just listening to you. You have so much knowledge in your brain. We are so lucky that we got to interview you and get some of that information out and be able to share that with families. I just feel so grateful to you for the time that you've made for us and for these amazing resources that you've put together. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And I really want to encourage families to, bottom line is, enjoy that family table and the social aspects of feeding as much as possible, as well as thinking about the nutrition aspects and all of those other kinds of things. But we really want to help families and children learn to enjoy that time together, to enjoy food, and learn about it, learn to cook, all those kinds of things together. So
yeah, it can be so fun. Well, that is what we're going to talk about next month on our Facebook Live. We're going to be focusing a little more on the fun side of food and how do you help your kids to have a really good relationship, tangibly with food. So cooking and preparing fun. So thank you so much. So next month, if anyone who's interested in learning more about food preparation, that's kind of what we'll be talking about more. And this is kind of the today was kind of the meat, like what goes into it and how you present your food. You are welcome, Deidre. Thank you so much for chiming in and asking questions, everyone who did. We just love it so much when our audience participates because we know we're reaching you. So thank you everyone for commenting today. And we are going to sadly have to wrap up because we talk so much. We used to fill up our time. Yeah, Sharon, you're such a joy. Thank you.
Well, thank you.